warm up and get to the point. We are live, and Andre and I found each other. And it was not Andre's fault. It was mine. I'm trying to do so many things with getting my tarot class. The night session starts next Monday, and then the day session will be a week from right now. I'll be teaching tarot, and in the midst of trying to get all the emails and things sent back and forth and getting people coordinated, I forgot to send Andre his invitation. It's a little hard to come to a party when you don't know where it is. So
exactly, yeah, that's true.
So tonight at 12:05 p.m. a.m. We go into the equinox. That's when it hits in Central Time.
Mm-hmm.
And the equinox, I knew about that from the time I was a kid without knowing astrology. That's almost an astronomic term, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the equi means equal, so equal days and nights. So where solstice is the beginning of something, or solstice is sun either being really bright or at the darkest point.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Two equinox points are light growing or light diminishing, which now the light is diminishing from here to December, but it's equal.
Yes, yes. And it's not exactly equal. There's just a few places on Earth where it's completely equal, but it's as close as you're going to get.
Yeah, and I always say to people, when you're looking at planets and stars, it's like horseshoes and grenades. If you're close, it's going to be good enough. You don't have to be. Don't have to be right there.
Yeah. I know, and isn't that what the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn are about? Isn't that something to do with that's as high as it goes or as low as it goes on the line around the Earth?
Yeah, the seasons happen because the Earth's tilt is either toward or away from the sun. So the southern hemisphere experiences summer in the opposite. And for them, summer is when it's our winter, and vice versa. So even though you'd think, how can that be such a major thing? But it is. The leaning in a bit gets hotter, lean back, it gets cooler. And then there's a point in between, and where it's fall or spring. But Cancer Capricorn, that's another interesting thing in that Cancer is north and Capricorn is south.
Right. Yes.
Right. And that shows up in astrology quite a bit because you probably have heard of the North Node and the South Node.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And south is Capricorn. So south is associated with career and with worldliness and out there. Cancer is north, and it's like your North Star is where you go home. You go home and you find yourself, so to speak, yourself, except that even then you go out in the world. So the two poles are always there, right?
Right. Well, yeah. Hopefully the universe has some kind of balance. So I went to the all-time expert on equinoxes, the Farmer's Almanac.
Right.
And it says, it lists this all as being astronomical events. And it also talks about the harvest moons and the weather and all that good stuff. Mm-hmm. And, it did 2 weeks ago here. It took a sincere shift towards fall. Thank God. Otherwise, we're all going to be crispy raisins all over this state. But I did get a couple questions for you. Equinoxes happen to all of us. Actually, every day happens to all of us if we think about it. But I did have a few people who asked questions, and I didn't think they were so specific that we couldn't learn a lot from. This was my first one. It's, how can I calculate my Saturn return? Birth month, December, year 1965.
Well, to calculate it, if you don't have a computer program to just tell you what happens, then you could go online. There are a lot of really great astrology sites. My favorite is Astro-Seek. They have a lot of really, really good measurements. It's almost as good as a computer program. The only reason it isn't is that there are things that it's better to have right on your computer, and there are a few more techniques and things like that. But he actually does some things that my program doesn't do. So he's really good. So that's one way. But if you're thinking in just broad terms, Saturn has a 30-year cycle, 29 and a half, right?
Mhm.
So someone born in 65 has, well, I'll check in my ephemeris because another thing. An ephemeris is a book of planet positions, right? So if you have one, and anybody that does astrology, astrologers have ephemeris always, especially back in the day when we had no computers. Then
Yeah, it's a
it
bus
was just the only
schedule
thing.
for the planets. It's a bus schedule for the planets.
Right. So if you turn the ephemeris and you look at December of 65, I'm guessing that Saturn would have been in Pisces.
It was. I already looked it up for her.
Right. So Saturn in Pisces, and then it's between 10 and 12, depending on the day. You know, you could look precisely, but you know that 1995, 94, 95, that's the first return because that Saturn goes back to Pisces. And then
Mhm.
again, now and next year, the full return for this person would be the actual more return years next year, because this year Saturn gets as far as 7 degrees in June. It's close. There'll be feelings of the Saturn return, a sense that
Mhm.
major chapter is ending. Where do I go to from here? What already happened before? And it's a pretty heavy period usually. For most people it's challenging. But next year even more so because the degrees are more precise. So that's the explanation around Saturn. Helps a lot if you're into astrology to have some tool to look up where planets are, right? Because that way
Right.
you can get your information.
Yeah, if you go to places like AstroSeek and a lot of the other ones, they'll give you, I mean, they actually have a thing where you calculate your birth chart. And as long as you understand about your birth time, you can do your own birth chart. And I always tell people, I know it sounds clunky, but you can download it as a PDF onto your phone if you don't want a piece of paper in your house. But if you get your own chart and then you start following when people say, oh, Mars is doing this much time in this sign, you can go look and say, is there something in that sign? Am I going to see something like that? Because that's how you learn what this stuff means. I mean, there are the overall whole holistic ways you learn astrology, but where the rubber hits the road is, did I really get married on the wrong day? Boy, when I finally went to a good astrologer, I couldn't have picked a worse day. And when we talk about electional astrology, man, I went out of my way. But
Yeah, it's true. This is, I mean, it is in the end, uh, it's not complicated arithmetic, but there are numbers involved because you're looking at a position that is between 0 and 30. And so
mhm,
you have to figure out, okay, where is it? It's in the middle of the sign. That would be
mhm,
15. And then you're just gauging how far away is one thing from another. What kind of angle are they making? So you're studying pretty simple geometry, like think of high school geometry,
mhm,
triangles, squares, and it's within a circle, and you don't need to know algebra or anything like that. But if you only go to the words, you're missing the core of it, which is where we're planets. And so it's a lot more meaningful to say my Saturn is at 12 degrees Pisces and it's connected to planets in a certain way than to just say, well, it's in Pisces. Of course,
right.
yes, but many people have Saturn in Pisces because if you're born within a 3-year cycle, right now, everyone between March of 23 and all the way to 26 minus a little bit in 25 will have Saturn in Pisces somewhere.
Mhm,
There.
yeah.
And it'll be doing something to each person in different ways because it could be conjunct the planet, it might be square something, whatever. It'll be depending on your philosophy, the luck of the draw, or your continuing incarnation from before, or who knows.
Well, okay, so we've got another uh, Pisces question. I have two children that are Pisces, and boy, is it ever true through they're either swimming up or they're swimming down. There's like no halfway with these guys, and they are very spiritual beings. But I've been watching all these planets, chomp through on them, and as their mom, I can just kind of go, oh, okay, well. And also, you got to realize the other thing is it's how close is the planet to where it would be exactly going over conjunct in what do you call that? The return. When would the Saturn return? That depends on the date. And there are going to be times where it's going to hit you harder than just being in the sign, right?
Yeah, I mean, the way you look, because, okay, so this brings in the other thing that um, tropical astrology, it's it's based on you, your consciousness, who you are is at the center, and everything is around you. So
Mm-hmm.
the planets do this thing where they people know retrograde, right? Mercury retrogrades 3 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Mars, Venus, they all have periods when they retrograde, but they don't go backward in the sky. That would be a circus. You would have a solar system that would be completely unworkable. It would explode. The planets are always moving forward, but it's not the Earth's movement makes it appear like they're going
Mm-hmm.
right. So then you can have a Saturn return where the person that was asking, they're around 10, between 10 and 12 degrees, depending on what day it is.
Mm-hmm.
So in that person's case, this wouldn't apply because, let me think. No, it doesn't, because it would apply more to if they're near 12. Okay, let's say that they're 12 degrees. They're born December 31st or early January of the next year, 12 something Pisces.
Mm-hmm.
Now you look in your ephemeris and you see that next year, Saturn goes through that degree in the spring, and then it retrogrades and goes through it again later in the
Mm-hmm.
year. So the whole year becomes your Saturn return, broadly speaking. And when it's near the degrees, it's more intense, right? And
Right.
if you see your degrees or close to your degrees, and you see an R or a D, meaning there it's going retrograde or there it's going direct, then you're really going to feel it because that planet is stationed. It means that optically it looks like it's not moving. It's still moving in the sky, but to you, it's you keep looking every day and it's in the same place. That's radiating more energy into your chart. So then you better have your ducks in a row. With Saturn, basically, the better your discipline, the better your life order, the easier it is, and the less, the more spaced out, undisciplined, the harder it gets because Saturn doesn't like disorder.
No,
It likes,
no. I've had Saturn running over my planets for the last several years, various and sundry ways. So I had a lot of squares and things, and yeah, it moved me. Uh, oh, we got another Saturn question. Hello. What can transiting Saturn conjunct Sun in the fourth house of Pisces bring?
well, the fourth house is familial.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the family matters, but also the idea of issues around early upbringing, because that's also the fourth. And when the Saturn goes through the fourth, think of it as it's your, in the world, it's your, where you live, your residence. And so
Mm-hmm.
people can take decisions around that or spend the whole period working that area in some way, or it can be uh, family matters the whole time. But psychologically, that's your underpinning. It's where you come from. It's your base. So Saturn going through there is a period when you're trying to figure out how you'll anchor yourself for the next 14 years, really the next 30 years, you could even say, until it
Mm-hmm.
returns again, so that becomes where you're coming from there, because maybe it wasn't there in the beginning. I mean, Saturn conjunct the Sun in the fourth, uh, transiting, but maybe it wasn't there natally. So this can happen to anybody. Saturn conjunct the Sun in any sign, and they'll experience this change in direction because the fourth is one of the corners. So you go through
Mm-hmm.
there, you set a new direction, and then you emerge into the world again. And I mean, it's a long period because it takes 14, 15 years to get to the pinnacle after that, right?
Right.
So it's a really important period. And if you bring in Pisces into it, then one of the great things would be spiritual focus, because that's where Pisces is most stellar, But I mean, you could get, to give you an example of how astrology can be comedic at times, is you could discover a chart where the person says, "Oh yeah, that Saturn went through my Saturn in the fourth house. That's when I started my shoe business because Pisces rules feet, right?" And they started their shoe business, and then
Mm-hmm.
and
It's
now,
not an invalid thought.
yeah, like that could be like someone who, like, not Nike maybe, but something around that, where the 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 thing itself is not particularly spiritual unless you really create some paradigm around it. So you have to discover how it's manifesting in the person's life. That's why astrologers really do best to ask a lot of questions, because you don't know how the person is using their chart until you ask and calibrate, and figure out. For example, too, Pisces is the most spiritual sign, but remember, Pisces is connected to monasteries on the high end and prisons on the low end. So it's the most criminal as well. So you can get some really dangerous people in Pisces because it's the 12th sign. So it's the soul has completed its journey. Ideally, you reach the point where you want to be more and more spiritual. Even if you're not in a monastery, you have monastery consciousness, but you may not have gone that way. Like our ex-president does a pretty good version of corrupt Pisces. He's not a Pisces, but he's got a lot of Neptune, which is one of the planets strongly connected to Pisces, and also a lot of Jupiter. So he corrupts it completely, and he doesn't know how to do anything without committing a crime, basically. Every single day, a new one is being, this is the way he is.
Yeah. And it's the way he chooses to be.
The way he chooses to be. Well, some people would say no. There are people who theorize that we don't choose anything. I strongly quarrel with that because, if you tell me that I applied my will to change something, but it wasn't really my will, like whose will was it? I guess it was the will of God, but it gets too crazy. I can't reason that way. So I'll agree with you. Yes, it's what he chooses to do, and he should choose something else. Yes.
Well, that's one of the things I liked about tarot is that when I was younger, if you got a card you really didn't like, it hit someplace, but it's like in the future. Okay, that possibly could be there, but you can also turn that card or change the reality once you're aware. Being forewarned is forearmed, so you can do something with it. That's one of the best things about knowing your astrologic charts. And sometimes you can learn a lot from your charts when you go back and look at them later. My husband died on November 20th in 2004. And a couple years later, I just was sitting around one day with one of my books and I looked it up, and Saturn was absolutely square my son on the day he died.
Yeah. No, that's an example. Now, mind you, we all experience quite a few Saturn squares in our life. Not a ton because it's a slow planet, but if Saturn squared the sun, killed a person every time, we wouldn't make it very far.
No, we wouldn't have families.
No. Exactly. But no, but that kind of thing, to give you an example, what popped into my mind when you said that is my little cat, she was a Gemini. I knew the day. I didn't know the time. And I would check her chart off and on, and I had seen some really rough times she went through when the transits were hard. But then she lived a long life, and by the end, she was really suffering. Poor thing. She was 19 years old. She died at 19 and a third. And then, sometimes with my astrology, I'll be tracking, and other times I lose track, and then I look back, which is actually really useful because a lot of the learning happens when you're not affecting anything. You just check. So I checked in Gemini, and she had Saturn opposite Mercury exactly, which Mercury is the ruler of Gemini when she was left the world. It's the end basically. But she lived to be essentially like 100-year-old human being. When you're 19 and whatever.
Yeah, 19-year-old cat's an old cat.
An old cat. Yeah. So, still Saturn though came for her in the end as well. It said, okay,
we're going now, kid. Yeah. Okay, we got one more question, and I know I said in my blurb that we would be avoiding politics, but I feel sorry for this person, so I'm going to let you see it. Please help us a little bit about Brazil. Things are critical over there. Bolsonaro, Lula, God help them. The people in Brazil. Have you done any reading on Brazil?
I haven't recently. The last time that I connected to Brazil, I remember that I was quite sure that Lula was going to win because I looked at his chart, and I think with Lula and Bolsonaro, neither have times available, but just looking at the day charts, to me, Lula looked like a winner and Bolsonaro a loser, and that's what happened. And the thing is, the world is still grappling with this, this instinct to bring in fascism, which I think is connected to Pluto in Capricorn, which is where it entered Capricorn in 2008, and it peaked right around when Trump came in because that was the middle of Capricorn.
Right.
And then it's like a curve that goes up and then it starts to go down. So Brazil is likely grappling with the same thing because they're going to have Bolsonaro people, like we have MAGA people, running around here.
Mhm.
The main thing is Lula's in power. So you just got to vote and keep the guy in or keep whoever is more democratic. It's that simple. It's the same struggle we're in here in the US. We have to stop these people. And, one thing that you have to remember is that these people that are trying to be fascists, they generally need really hard times. Like what happened in the 30s, the Great Depression was really helpful bringing in fascism because the Depression caused chaos. These
Right.
guys need chaos, or these women maybe, but the only woman I could think
Mhm.
of is the Italian woman, and she's more moderate in her fascist
The
impulses.
fascist relative, yeah.
Yeah, right. But so the point is that all you can do is stay together as a group, focus on the next election, and realize that Pluto is getting out of Capricorn. So I find it, crazy to think that this has any long-lasting power. Pluto going into Aquarius is a sign of the people. Fascism is fading. These impulses, they're fading. Now, there may be other things that will come in, like climate change, things like that, that could upset the apple cart. But Brazil and the US should get better. It's just that it's going to take time. And then when you think of countries, in a way, it's like people, because people also change slowly, but countries even more slowly, right? If you get into a jam, it could take a decade, So I'm thinking, my feeling is a couple more election cycles, maybe till the midterms of the next election, at least, or
Mhm.
maybe as much as two more elections, presidential elections, because I don't see how the US settles down, even if we elect Democrats, as I think we will. The MAGA people won't be happy. And in Brazil, you're not going to get rid of these Bolsonaro people right away. It'll be a while, right? But I still would think that they're going to be fine.
I my gut instincts, I threw a couple cards on that when I looked at it, just in case you hadn't looked at Brazil's chart recently. And what I saw is it's a slow growth period because think about it, it's so hard for people to say I was wrong. We do not live in a planet that wants people to admit that if they've had strong beliefs that they were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it really takes a lot for people to grow into that and to get forgiveness. But I think some of the universal astrology that's lining up with all those big, old, slow moving plants. I always think of the ones for out in space as being old. I don't know why. I mean, they're not older than we are, but they're slow moving, and the changes they bring, um, we, especially in the era we live in now, we want everything now. We want to turn on YouTube and see
Correct.
brilliant reports on Midas Touch about how they're all getting nailed to the wall, and which is that's not forgiveness, to nail them to the wall.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. And they are, I don't know if the old fits mostly to Saturn, but we're getting, uh, by 2026, Saturn, well, practically all of them. So Jupiter changes every year anyway. It's a 12-year cycle, so it's pretty
Mhm.
quick. But Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, all four are changing signs. Pluto by the end of next year, Saturn, Neptune by 25, and then fully in 26, and Uranus is in 26. It's a bit later. So uh, we are going into a new era here. This is a major shift, and
Mhm.
the shifts are always a little tricky because new things are coming in, things like AI and things like that, and also remember that Brazil, I don't know so much. I'd have to have a chart, which I don't, of something that I could trust for the entire country. But the U.S. for sure, we're in a has those Civil War echoes. That's why there's so much division and so much of this stuff floating around. But all I can say is the last time that it happened, the majority won the argument, and the
Right.
majority is going to win the argument again. But we got to go through it,
Yeah.
and yeah.
And we need to look for the positive signs because if you look at the last two, it was just this Tuesday where states had elections to fill major posts,
Mm-hmm.
and they all went to Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of one in New Hampshire, it's a district that had voted for Trump in 16 and in 20 with
Correct.
some pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of live free or die libertarianism up there, but they elected a Democrat with points that when I used to run an election, you'd look at what percentage you knew kind of generally voted Republican in an area and how many voted Democrat. And then you'd look at kind of the who's in between that you don't know where they're going. So you figure that's why they say in this country it's always going to be such a close race. But up there, it was like a massive swing. I mean, it meant that a whole lot of people who had been following the Republican line or choosing to vote for the Republican were instead, voting across the line and going for the Democrat, and as if to say, this is our displeasure. Same thing in Ohio. They win. When you win by a margin of more than 3 or 4, that's massive. If you have never run a campaign and never had to sit there and chew your fingernails till 3 a.m. And I think people are, and I know in part why some people don't want to play that up too much, because they get that, well, we're going to make them relax too much. They're not going to want to, they're not going to get out to vote. But I guarantee you, everybody feels like their life's on the line, or the life of someone they love, and they're going to pick it up and vote like our lives all mattered on that point. Let's see. Oh, thank you. Oh, Sandy's a new member. Thank you, whoever Sandy is. Let's see. We do. If you guys would like to post a question, we're trying to avoid political questions. I threw in Brazil because I think that that's kind of a country we don't think about, but they're kind of caught in the same tatters of democracy that we are. Okay. Here's a question that I was a lovely lady, Prince Charming's mom. I was born with Mercury retrograde. How does that affect me?
How does that affect you? Well, Mercury retrograde in a person's chart, it doesn't do anything bad or anything like that. It's more internal. Retrograde planets are more internally driven. So, in fact, Mercury retrograde, a lot of great writers, because they are more in touch with their internal energy. The one drawback with Mercury retrograde is that you may not be as aware of how your communication is being received by other people, right? And so then that's where a person can be talking and droning on, and then in that sense upsetting people. So there's where you have to be more conscious, see if when you're talking with someone, how are they receiving what you're saying. So it can become a great spiritual practice, right? But bottom line, nothing bad about it. If anything, think of it as a strength, because a retrograde planet has more potential to express more personal power as you are gaining, wisdom and understanding yourself better. It's like that.
Yeah, there's an astrologer I know who has Mercury retrograde, and she said, I love it when Mercury retrogrades are coming. It's like my season.
Yeah, no, which, by the way, it's okay. And I do notice on Mercury retrograde periods, the plus is going over things you were leaving behind and catching up and things like that. But the down can be that you do get all these people miss appointments, or suddenly I noticed one thing that I had where it was sending me the email to notify me, and then it stopped doing it, and I couldn't figure out why. So you can get these miscommunications during that period, but it's not a big deal. It just means getting through it with some of those.
This last one for me, Andre, I really thought about calling you halfway through it. The first day Mercury went retrograde, my phone broke. So I took it into the phone shop and they fixed it. And then 2 days later, it broke even worse. So then I had to take it to the factory store. My washing machine flooded, and we found out we needed new valves for the washing machine. I came to do a show on my channel, the same setup we're just going through now. There was a hideous echo throughout the whole, and we had to stop it after 5 minutes because people were screaming, turn that off. And then, so it was just, and I was like, what's going on? And then I was kidding these guys. I go to an exercise thing twice a week, and they use resistance machines that are electronically run. And I was joking with the guy when he reminded me my appointment was the next day. I said, well, we'll see if the things are working because everything electric's breaking around me. I get to the place. He said, that's never happened there. Little men were running around all the machines. All the electric machines had broken. So I was, at that point, I was ready to just go home and say, I don't know what this one is, but I think it's bad.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will tell you that I generally try to I try to avoid buying most things, unless it's just food, or if I want to buy a gadget or something that I need,
You
I
don't.
generally wait almost always, and because I almost always change my mind. I'll think, okay, that looks like the right thing, and then I let the Mercury go direct, and I buy a different brand, or I don't buy it at all, or so there is that you can change your mind about it. It's better to research during Mercury retrograde. That is another thing that a Mercury retrograde person would be really good at if they have a type of work where they're researching. Can really thrive, right? Because of
That's right. Okay,
yeah.
we've got this one. This is kind of nice. I have no planets in the 4th or 5th house. Is this uncommon or weird?
No, that's just a lot of empty houses. When houses are empty, you look to the rulers of those houses, and they might even be more emphasized in that, say, your fourth was a planet that had 3 squares and a trine. That planet is going to be huge. And so you might then, because the fourth is the home real estate, might be someone that sells real estate, for example, as an example. Or the fifth connects to your children, to your creativity, to your pleasures, to your sports, to your games. Again, it could be a planet that is very featured, and even though the house is empty, it's still vibrating a lot in your chart, right? So it's not weird, though. There's no such thing as weird. If you do enough charts, you'll see everything, every possibility.
If you have no planets on your chart, you're in a lot of trouble.
If you know planets at all, then you've transcended, you've left the realm.
Well, a lot of times people have stelliums. They'll have 4 or 5 planets,
Right.
not lots of people, but it happens. So that means like half of your choices are going to be in one place. So, you can't spread them out. They're not going to be in every one of the houses.
Yeah, and that's a case where if a person has a cluster like that, then in the cycles, they're pretty easy to see challenging periods, easy periods, depending on where planets are, because it'll be hitting them one after the other. And it's a great astrology study and a great form of guidance because you already know in advance, okay, Saturn is coming or Uranus or whatever it is, versus when you don't know, then you think, that it's some other reason. So it's like that. It concentrates the energy both around what you do and what you think about and all of that. And it informs you as to the cycles.
Okay, and we're going to see if we have. Sharon Sipe has posted, if you want to look in the chat, you can find out how to reach Andre on his YouTube channel, and she also put how to reach you for consultations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I hate to say it, but you see, with the astrology, I don't say this to, encourage you necessarily to set up a consultation, but with a chart, you've got to look at the whole chart because you can say things that are interesting, and sometimes a person can hear one thing and it can immediately it clicks in and it changes their life. For the most part, you look at the chart, see where things are. You got to look at all the patterns, including that charts show you sometimes these things. They're called harmonics that are very interesting, but you have to pretty much use an astrology program unless you want to sit there by hand and spend an hour, finding where they are. But then they can really tell you more about the person's personality, how the best do things, their talents, and so forth. All of that, though, is contained in the entire chart. All of the planets, where they are, how they talk to each other, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just, like I said, my piece of advice to everyone is get a birth chart, get it drawn up by a good astrologer, or go get one of the mechanized ones, depending on how much you want to spend on it, and then just try to follow some of the rhythms that you see, because I know right now we have the equinox tonight, and then we have the change of seasons from we go into Libra. No, we're leaving Libra. Or we're going into Libra.
Going into Libra.
Okay, going into Libra, and I always found the fall, we claim our new year is January because that's when the tax man comes. But when I used to run volunteer groups or ran campaigns or anything, I found out people wake up in the fall. And I think I used to think it was that early childhood training of we start school in the fall. So we think, okay, now I can start doing new things, join new groups, be part of new things. But I think there's a lot of what's in the astrologic charts that just pinpoint fall as the time you've been through your winter, you've grown your crops, you're bringing in the harvest. Now I have some time to do other stuff. And astrologically, there's a lot in the planets that do that. And I think the fall is the time when a lot of people choose to go and start building new things and starting new things.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, the fall is one of the four turning points. Like when I said earlier about how in the fourth house, that's actually the fourth. If you do it by sign, is the place of summer. But the idea is that every time you go through a corner, so the four seasons are the four corners, shift in direction. And in the fall, yeah, that makes sense because you are turning. That's why also people report that they maybe catch more colds and things like that as there is an actual adjustment that happens. So be careful that way, to guard your health around this time.
And we're, and I think it was 2 years ago at Lionsgate on 8/8 in August that I had a vision about that. It's like the universe put its foot on the accelerator pedal and said, we're going to start moving everything a lot faster. And I was like, really? I mean, I realized we were all in lockdown and COVID at that point, but, faster. I mean, more changes. How much more radical of change could you make than we were all out in the world and then all of a sudden we weren't? And now it's true. And even though we're merging out into a world, we're moving into a very different world.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is true. And I this time I don't think of it as hyperbole because, yes, when you've got major planetary shifts, like to give you an example, if you think of the Neptune cycle, 2011 is when it enters Pisces. And between then and now, and it's going to last till 25, 26 before it leaves the sign. That whole period, on the plus side, has really, really expanded the information flow online. Places like YouTube now have phenomenal information. I used to hunt in occult shops, for back in the 80s, some kind of book or whatever. Now you find everything. I mean, you can research, you can learn anything you like. You can also present it. That's the upside. The downside is the disinformation, the whole thing of fake news, all of that is also Neptune on the downside. So Neptune leaving that means that energy changes. It goes into a different dimension. So those are important life changes because we've been in this for quite some time and now it moves. So it makes perfect sense that that's one of them. That's only one. And there are three others that are shifting. Saturn is shifting, Pluto is shifting, and Uranus. So it's a lot. The Uranus, I think, has probably a lot to do with the AI revolution, more and more technological advancement, because Uranus is very connected to that. So, but probably I'm thinking that even with Neptune, there are things like, look at what happens with the level of resolution of videos, and you get more and more, in other words, better and better fakes in a way. But some of them are useful, and some of them are not good, and that's society advancing, moving forward.
And the problem is, so many kids were never taught critical thinking, when they were in school, when they could have taught it to them. My youngest was homeschooled, and every day we had a lesson in critical thinking because there was a whole curriculum for it. And you read a little fairy tale and say what you feel, read a little story, and you read a paragraph from one that was a factual writing about how some animal lives. And then you'd read about a fictional animal and you'd say, okay, which one of this is fact and which is fiction? And you think about when you start with them that young. When she was 10, I sat her down, and this how long ago that was, guys. There was a newspaper, but there was a newspaper article about a college professor who was giving his incoming freshmen an essay they had to read, and they had to pull out what was speculative and what was factual in the writings, and less than 10% of his kids could do it. And this was 20 years ago. And so we sat her down with it. And we said, okay, this is what you have to do. And she went through and she got 90% of it right. But you have to be trained how to see it. It's like reading a chart. You're not going to pick up a chart. Quite honestly, I have a friend who she said, I think astrology is fascinating, but when I look at charts, I think, oh my God, all those planes are landing in the airport at the wrong time. That's what it's done.
Yeah, no, the thing is that it's like anything, though, is I can see a progression in my astrology years, and where I was looking at the same chart, but I just wasn't seeing anywhere near as much.
Yeah.
One good way to do it is to think of it as break it down and go piece by piece. Your mind will put it together. So, for instance, you're studying astrology. The best place to start is follow the moon, because the moon is moving around in 1 month. It does all the signs.
Mm-hmm.
You get to feel what it's doing to your chart by connecting with those planets, but you got to know where the moon is to track that, and you got to see what it's doing. And then from there, you can expand, because you track the other ones at the same time, but you're not going to know what Saturn is like for years, because you got to wait till it changes signs. It takes longer to figure that one out. But the moon right away can get you going. And that's one of all the pieces, right? And yet it's a start, and you can keep adding on more and more things. And once you have interest in it, it doesn't feel like it's so overwhelming.
No, it's not. Well, it's like you hand someone a tarot deck and they look at all the signs and symbols and numbers. And
Right.
Like I was telling Andre, that part of the reason I was so ditzy and didn't send him his invitation was I'm starting a tarot class, and I will proudly put this. If you're interested in my tarot class, it's starting next week. There are links you can get to it. And I only have 15 people in the class, because I really think you need to talk about some of this stuff. But we don't start reading cards the first week. We learn numerology, 1 through 9. And what does that mean? And that also, when I did a study of numbers on my channel once, I did a different number each day. For one, I had one in numerology, one in tarot. And I also used what's the first house in the astrologic chart. I am. And then 2 is I have. And, you move on. And they're all the same. I mean, when you break them down to their most basic points, the numbers are always the same. And they have the same meanings. And when you get it like that, because I know people say, how am I supposed to keep track of these houses? Well, there's only 12 of them. And if you take it slowly, take the first half, 1 through 6, and then 7 through 9, 7 through 12 is the outside world. It's when you grow up and you leave and go out on your own. But there's those patterns in life are really important for us to know. And I think the more we know and understand them when we're looking at life, the less overwhelming life becomes.
Yes, it's true. It's true. And the thing is, the houses thing, by the way, it's almost better not to think of them as houses. Just study the signs.
Mm-hmm.
And the signs are the houses. In fact, the system I use whole sign, which means whatever I see rising, that's 1, and then the next one is 2, and the next one is 3. So, and it's not only does it work, in my opinion, the best of all the systems, but it makes it easier, to not get all caught up in, houses that are smaller, bigger. They're all the same size. It's just the sign, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're always studying the zodiac. You're studying Aries, Taurus, Gemini, the 12 things. Yes, 12 is more, it's a bigger study than if it were 2 or 3, I know. But you'll figure it out, especially if you take a class at some point to get the principles, maybe read 2 or 3 books, to get a sense of what they're saying about it. But then you have to track. You have to track, because if you don't follow the moon or something to see where it is, at any given point, like right now, the moon is in late Sagittarius. As we're speaking, the moon earlier today, but it's still close. It's near the galactic center. I don't know if you knew this, but
Yeah,
it's near in that area. I think it's 26 or 27 Sagittarius is where the galactic center is. It's now at 28, or it's in there. So
Do you want
That's
to
how
explain to the charming people who are going the galactic what?
the galactic center is, think of the solar system because it's a huge thing, but it's relative to the galactic center is very tiny. So the sun, we can do astrology where this is the astrology we do. Where I'm at the center, the planets are around me, but it's in this backyard here. The sun itself is traveling really fast, but it takes 250 million years to do a full circle around the center of the galaxy.
Mhm.
And the center of the galaxy is 26 plus Sagittarius, right? So you can put that in your chart and it may have a connection to something or not. I mean, it's
Mhm.
not like you have to always have a connection to it, but it's a valid point because that is what the entire galaxy is going around. There's a black hole there. It's called Sagittarius A. It's the size of 4 million suns.
Mhm.
How about that? 4 million suns together in one spot. And yet, that 4 million suns compared to the galaxies is also very small.
Yeah, we're in a small galaxy. We like to think we're big cheese, but we're just big cheese because we're standing in it.
Yeah, no, and I mean, and we're not like where we are, the galaxy. Someone, there's a, how they use those scales to try to describe how big something is compared to
Right.
something else. So the way it's explained is the solar system is so big that our best spaceships that we send out there take more than a decade to get to the end, and they're traveling at 40, 50,000 miles an hour. And
Mhm.
yet, like they sent out Voyager in 1970 and it was taking pictures in 2010 or something. It's ridiculous. It takes
Mhm.
forever. But all of that, right? Because it takes, it's billions of miles. All of that, imagine that it were the size of a quarter, put it in a quarter, right? And
Mhm.
then the galaxy that we're in is the
Mhm.
size of the North American continent. Think
Mhm.
about that. Think about how crazy that is, because the galaxy is 100,000 light years across, right? It's ridiculous. You
Mhm.
can't even conceive it, right? So, but I don't do astrology of the whole galaxy. That's nuts. I mean, even though that's another thing. When people say, "Oh, you're doing astrology, these planets are too far away." Well, they're too far away from me, but they're not that far away when I compare it to everything else.
No, they're here with us.
Yeah, they're
We were born with this pattern around us, and I believe that the universe has given us tools to understand it better, and the
yes.
planets are one of them.
Yes, yes. The planets are literally, that's the thing to recognize is we're formed from these energies. We're actually embodying these energies. And something else that's interesting is that most of the solar system
Mm-hmm.
is Sun, Jupiter, Saturn. After that, it's almost nothing. It's peanuts, like flotsam. So
Oh yeah.
that means your core energy is Sun, Jupiter, Saturn. If you can figure out how to do your Jupiter, Saturn, and tilt it toward your sun, your life
Mm-hmm.
becomes a lot easier. So there's one, interesting thing that comes from the astronomy, because we would only know this from the astronomy. They describe the masses of these planets and things like that. And by the way, Jupiter, Saturn, not only were they really involved in the beginning of life, because when the universe was forming, the solar system was forming, the Jupiter was falling into the sun, and then it got locked into Saturn's orbit and it pulled it out. That left the middle so you could get a rocky planet, and here we are. So that's one thing. But also today, Jupiter acts like a gatekeeper because asteroids would be hitting the Earth right and left, but
Oh yeah.
Jupiter
It
grabs everything.
it's our big protector.
Big protector. Yeah,
It's like the
exactly,
big brother in the neighborhood with a bad temper.
exactly. Yeah.
Because it is just a gas giant. Is there a core at the middle of Jupiter? I never can get a clear answer on that, or do they even really know?
They say that it's the core. The latest I read, I believe it said it's something like it's called liquid hydrogen or metallic hydrogen. There's always a core, but it can take different forms. It's not always an
Is
exact
that
rock.
like our kind of hardcore? Like,
Yeah, but there is a thing where there's gas surrounding something that is more dense, which acts as
hmm
the core. So I mean, think of how crazy the temperature has to be to have liquid hydrogen. I mean, what is that? Or I mean, metal hydrogen, metallic hydrogen.
yeah.
It's probably harder than a rock.
What one of the planets has enough carbon in its atmosphere And I remember they said that it could be raining diamonds because it has the heat to make it, and was it Neptune?
I don't know if in the solar system which one that is. I do know that if you study some of the astronomy, there are crazy things like there are planets that are entirely diamond. The entire
Mm-hmm.
planet is one giant. I mean, all you have to do is go there with a machine and chip away, if you could. It's very hard, and come back, and you're rich beyond your wildest dreams. But
Yeah,
of course,
but
that never happens.
it's a little bit. We'll let Elon go do that.
Yeah.
Um, and he'd be crazy enough to really see. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be an astronomer, and then I found out you have to do math, and that kind of killed that dream. But uh, I remember when they started the books that I used to read as a kid about what the planets were like were just, what they could measure from the Earth and all this stuff. But I was talking one time at a thing that was about meteors, but there was a scientist there who studies meteors and when they come in and what they can learn. And um, he said that what the astronomers most lacked. He said you should have become an astronomer, and I said why? And he said you have a good imagination. You went into media, you went into theater, and you did that kind of stuff. And he said those of us who sent the rockets out and all of the testing things, what has amazed us is how totally different, how we could never, if we sat up all night, have imagined what we would find on these planets and how they're constructed and how different they really are from one another, even though they're all the same. I mean, they all came out of the same stardust as we did, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think that's what I enjoy. I enjoy watching some of the shorts about science that relates to what we do, and especially a lot of the quantum theory now that's coming through. Because my dear sweet departed physicist husband, when he was dying in 2004, he was reading these books. And I said, what are those about? And he said, I'm going to figure out how you do what you do. He said, I can't do it, but I'm going to figure out how you do it. And when he was in the hospital the last time, he said, it's quantum theory. You've got to go learn quantum theory. And I went, excuse me, no, I don't do quantum theory. That's what you do because you're a physicist. He said, no, he said, it's what you do. And now it's all over everywhere. And some of my understanding of it comes from him trying to explain to my poor little P-shaped brain what a quantum theory was. But
That's very interesting. That quantum is there you're going to the very, very small, the micro universe.
Mm-hmm.
And then the macro universe is what Einstein was really good at. That's the idea of galaxies.
Mm-hmm.
But underneath it all, yeah. And quantum theory, it's quantum has this quality of very paradoxical. So you can only grasp it by almost like being in it. It's like being in a meditative state. You can't really explain what it is. It just is. And you get what it is by being there.
That's what it means. It is what it is because the energy is there, and you're like,
right. I know.
Okay.
I know, but it's just the thing that language that way is language is by its very nature can't be the truth. As soon as you open your mouth, you're labeling something, and it's can only be close to what you're trying to get at, and so
Mm-hmm.
it can be really useful, but it can be also confusing and at times a problem, so to speak. So this is like where in astrology, the solar energy, when it's really, really connected, it's your being without any thought or any feeling or anything. It's just being, pure being.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not something you can, I mean, you can talk about it and write poems and write books, but it's not it. The thing is, you got to be there
That's
to
right.
experience it. Yeah, exactly.
And you got to suit up and show up. And I mean, I don't expect to understand this by the time I leave. When I cross over, I'll send you all big notes about what I see. But it's yes,
You're a Taurus. You're a Taurus. You'll say, I'm seeing a lot of money here.
that's right. I'm seeing a lot of material goods here, all stacked up. But I'm a Scorpio too, so
Scorpio rising. Yeah, it's true.
right.
Scorpio rising.
But anyway, I don't see anybody. Everybody's thanking each other for being here and liking it, and Um, and they're talking about different things people can do. So, and Sharon Sipe, we're really happy to see you here. Sharon's having a medical crisis in her family she's been dealing with. Glad to see you back. And I'm glad to see Andre here. And
It's a pleasure.
well, it's always fun to try and teach people about how to extend what you and I understand and we know and we've seen work. Once it clicks for you once you do a lunation cycle where you really do the intentions at the new moon and follow through with all of the 3 years of letting it flow around till it comes back where it started and you see how much comes through. And I've done that and I've seen it happen, then you begin to understand that there's so much more that each of us can do individually. And like I said, if you want a good reading, you want someone to come and explain it to you, but then how are you going to work with it after that? You're going to have to work with it after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. It's very true. I mean, the thing is that in reality, I see charts as much or more as a map of your will, your ability to shape yourself and your life much more than the idea that things are happening to you. Yeah, some things do happen to you, but the bulk is what you're doing. If you can figure out the way to unlock your chart vibrates in a different way, and your magnetic energy is different. You attract different things into your life. That's the key. Of course, there'll be cycles that are more difficult and some that are less difficult. That's true. But even so, the key is your own ability to connect with your own energies that way.
Yeah. And you can't do it unless you put in a little bit of time and work and figure out what direction you're headed in and what comes more easily to you. So if, like I said, I'm teaching a class, Andre teaches courses through your Patreon thing, don't you?
Yeah, and Patreon actually, if you want to learn astrology, although some of it I haven't lately done the most basic, but I do have those classes as well. And the thing is, when you join, all the classes are there, so you can start at any point. There are about 100 videos, but the idea is that it's month to month, so you can leave if you're not, decide rather than having to front a lot of money. It's $12 and then for a month, and then you get all the classes. But if it's not working for you, you can let it go, because otherwise you have to spend more money, to commit to an entire course. Thing. So yeah, it's on my Patreon.
Yeah, and unfortunately for those of you who want to learn tarot from me, you got to pay for the whole thing up front. It's going to be 6 weeks classes.
Still worth it.
I've taught this course for over 40 years. I brought the curriculum back up. I've updated it, and I'm going to be teaching with Jeffrey Wright Color, and because he does more of the meditations and the higher esoteric realms and the energy healing, which I don't do, but I have never had a person take my course that couldn't read the cards when they left. They all stayed the whole time. So, and like I said, there's only going to be 15 people in each course with us there with you, helping you get through it and learn it. And it's like a chart. You have to have a chart. You have to figure out where your planets are. It's like reading cards. You have to get the cards. You have to kind of have some understanding of the meanings. And then you just have to read the cards. I mean, that's how you learn. And that's how you learn to do the stuff we do. What we do isn't magic. They used to call us magicians, but we're not. What we do is we put thoughts that we're exposed to together, and we find the truths in them, and we help. Anybody can do that. I had a lady who walked in my course once that came with a neighbor that the husband had paid for her to take the course because she was at home with 3 little toddlers. And he said she has to get out of the house once a week for a while. She has to get out and be with people. And she knew nothing about tarot. She'd never been to a psychic fair, never picked up a crystal, didn't know about astrology, didn't know anything. She was a Baptist. She'd never been exposed to it. And she walked in and she ended up being one of the best readers I ever trained because she had absolutely no preconceptions. And it was her escape from the kids. So
no, and by the way, I totally endorse your tarot. It's a message for everyone, because you did my reading a while back, and you do a really good work. So
Well, I
definitely.
did your year wheel, and
You did,
remember
yeah.
when
No, but I can tell you know what you're doing. I mean,
yeah.
so I endorse I totally heartily endorse your your work.
Well, and I endorse and Andre, and now we're going to leave this love fest. We're gonna because we're at an hour, and I
Right.
don't like to keep people more than an hour.
All
And
right.
thank you so much, Andre, for showing up.
That was a pleasure. Bye,
And
everyone.
thank you everyone for being here. Bye.
Bye.